When historians gather to list the worst rulers Spain ever endured, one name towers above all others. Every scholar who's examined his reign, every diplomat who reported from his court, reaches the same conclusion. There has never been a more grotesque, more cruel, or more sexually deviant king to wear the Spanish crown. And yet most people have never heard the real story. The fairy tales about noble marriages, bloodlines blessed by God, and the dignity of European monarchy are carefully woven myths. The truth is far darker. Behind the walls of Madrid's royal palace, one king transformed his private chambers into a theater of humiliation and horror. His name was Ferdinand VII, remembered in whispers as El Rey Felon, the Felon King. What set him apart from even the most corrupt rulers of Europe wasn't just his politics, but his body itself. Deformed, obsessed, and incapable of normal intimacy, Ferdinand turned his dysfunction into a weapon that scarred wives, concubines, and an entire kingdom. This is not the tale of a monarch who lost battles or squandered treasure. This is the story of how a king's warped desires helped destroy Spain itself. Our story begins in October 1819, in the royal palace of Madrid. Inside a candlelit chamber, a girl barely 16 years old waited for her new husband. She was Maria Josepha Amalia of Saxony, raised in a convent, so sheltered that she believed babies were delivered by storks. Her attendants, too embarrassed to prepare her, simply dressed her in white, placed a rosary in her trembling hands, and left her alone. The door creaked open. What entered was no handsome prince from fairy tales. It was Ferdinand, 35 years old, swollen with gout, waddling on heavy legs, his lips thick and glistening, his eyes predatory. But it wasn't his face that turned the queen's blood to ice. Ferdinand suffered from a medical condition so extreme that even modern physicians struggle to classify it. Court doctors described it clinically: macrogenitosomia, an abnormally enlarged and misshapen anatomy. Eyewitnesses were less delicate. French writer Prosper Mérimée recorded courtiers' accounts: thin as a taper at the base, swollen like a fist at the end, and as long as a billiard cue. Now imagine a convent-raised child suddenly confronted with that. Maria Josepha screamed, bolted from the bed, and tried to flee. But Ferdinand, drunk on wine and lust, chased her, an obese monarch stumbling after a terrified teenager, across the royal chambers. She outran him. Enraged, the king stormed out naked, his deformity on full display, and demanded her attendants prepare her within 15 minutes. These ladies-in-waiting, horrified, tried to calm the young bride. But when Ferdinand returned, ready to enforce his marital rights, he was greeted not by submission but by shame. The girl, in absolute terror, had lost control of her bowels. The bed reeked of human waste. The king recoiled, sneered that queens are not meant to smell like civet, and abandoned her for over a week. That disastrous night was only the beginning of Maria Josepha's nightmare. Ferdinand's grotesque anatomy had haunted him long before. His first marriage at 17 had been a scandal across Europe. His bride, Maria Antonia of Naples, recorded in desperate letters how the prince spent months pawing at her awkwardly, incapable of consummating the union. For nearly a year, the marriage remained untouched. Only after a priest personally explained the mechanics of sex did Ferdinand attempt it, causing such injury that his wife miscarried twice and died at just 21. From humiliation was born obsession. Once Ferdinand learned how to force intimacy, he became consumed by it. By the time he reclaimed Spain's throne in 1814, he was 30 years old, infected with syphilis, and drowning in appetite. The felon king developed a ritual. Cloaked in black, he would sneak out of the palace to prowl Madrid's seediest brothels. His favorite den of vice was run by a notorious madam, Pepa la Malagueña, a place so infamous that decent citizens crossed the street to avoid it. He never went alone. A band of corrupt young aristocrats accompanied him, turning the city's red light district into their playground. Witnesses described scenes that would have shamed Rome under Caligula, the king of Spain, drunk on cheap wine, boasting of his deformity, comparing himself against his companions in grotesque contests of size. They nicknamed him El Bien Dotado, the well-endowed one. Ferdinand reveled in the attention, but worse than his bragging was his fetish. According to the testimony of Count José María de Villalobos, The king confided, "The greatest pleasure is not in the act, but in collecting the rags marked with their maidenhood." Yes, he hoarded blood-stained sheets from the virgins he deflowered, trophies catalogued with dates and names. Meanwhile, his wives became victims of his obsession with producing an heir. Maria Isabel of Braganza, his second wife, tried to bring dignity to Madrid, founding museums and supporting women artists. But in 1818, when she went into labor, tragedy struck. The baby was breech, the mother weakening. The doctors asked whether to save the queen or the child. Ferdinand's order was merciless. Save the child. Cut her if you must. What followed was a scene of medieval horror. Without modern anesthesia, surgeons sliced into her abdomen. She regained consciousness mid-surgery, shrieking in agony as they cut into her womb. The infant was already dead. Maria Isabel bled out at 21. Court whispers blamed Ferdinand's deformity, or the syphilis he carried, for the complications. He felt no remorse. Within a year, he sought another bride. That bride was the convent-raised teenager Maria Josefa. After the wedding night disaster, she resisted him fiercely, scratching, biting, even once kicking him so hard he limped from her chamber. She clung to her childhood belief that intimacy was sinful, insisting that babies came from angels or storks. Desperate, Ferdinand appealed to the highest authority, the Pope himself. Pius VII, astonished, wrote a letter instructing the young queen that marital relations were not only permitted but her sacred duty. Even that wasn't enough. Maria Josefa agreed only under strange conditions. She would pray an entire rosary before each encounter, keep her eyes closed, and imagine the Virgin Mary to preserve her purity. Thus began the most unerotic royal marriage in history. For 10 years, Ferdinand labored to father an heir, while his wife whispered prayers through every attempt. They never produced a child. She died at 25, officially of fever, though many believed it was despair. At last, Ferdinand married again. His fourth and final wife, Maria Cristina of Bourbon II Sicilies, was young, shrewd, and pragmatic. She understood the problem was not political but mechanical. The royal physician, Dr. Antonio Hernandez, proposed a bizarre solution: a silk cushion with a precisely measured hole in the center, limiting the king's penetration to prevent injury. Presented as a medical necessity, the contraption preserved Ferdinand's ego. It worked. Within months, Maria Cristina conceived. On October 10, 1830, cannons boomed across Madrid to announce the birth of Isabella II, a living heir. 2 years later, another daughter followed. But this success sparked a new crisis. Spanish law forbade female succession. Ferdinand's brother expected the throne. Instead, the king overturned centuries of tradition with a single decree, naming Isabella his heir. When he died in 1833, civil war erupted. Spain bled for years, all because a king's deformity required a cushion to produce heirs. After Ferdinand's death, Maria Cristina ordered a secret inventory of his private rooms. What servants discovered was chilling. A cedar chest filled with neatly folded cloths, each labeled with a woman's name and date. Courtiers testified they saw dozens, souvenirs of virgins, widows, servants, even daughters of executed rebels. One haunting entry read Anna, 15 years, daughter of Colonel Bermudez. February 1823, her father, a liberal officer, had been executed. She came to the palace to beg for mercy. She left broken, her innocence catalogued among the king's trophies. It was systematic. Whenever Ferdinand crushed a rebellion, his collection grew. Political violence and sexual predation were entwined. Two expressions of the same cruelty. Maria Cristina ordered the chest burned, but not before its existence was recorded by horrified witnesses. Ferdinand VII died unloved in 1833. His country divided, his dynasty tainted. His brother launched the Cruelest Wars. His widow remarried a palace guard. And his daughter Isabella inherited not only his throne, but many whispered his appetites. Historians have struggled to describe him. One called him cowardly, selfish, suspicious, and vengeful. The Duke of Wellington, who met him in person, dismissed him as the most contemptible of God's creatures. All are correct, yet too mild. Because Ferdinand was not merely a bad king, he was a predator with a crown, a man whose physical deformity became a tool of domination, a ruler who treated women's suffering as collectibles. His true legacy lies not in the throne he left to his daughter, nor in the civil wars he provoked, but in the unnamed women silenced by his abuse, the servants who could not refuse, the virgins reduced to trophies, the queens who died in agony, Ferdinand VII proved that monsters do not always lurk in forests or fairy tales. Sometimes they sit on thrones, cloaked in ermine, worshipped as God's chosen. And sometimes, just sometimes, history refuses to let their crimes be forgotten.